Hi, I'm Arthur. And a fun fact about anyone who plays 40k, they are always one bad day away from picking up Custodes. I am one of those individuals, as on several occasions I have considered grabbing Custodians and possibly playing Shadow Wardens, as I am an edgelord with no friends and want to keep all my shinies and evil relics to myself. I believe I made a Custodian video a while back, but I think it's time for a fucking update, as it's been long enough that I think I have learned a lot more and can discuss them a bit more accurately. And also, I want to discuss their side pieces today as well. So, in one big hurrah, I'm going to cover the Talons of the Emperor, and maybe some of the more controversial moments. There's going to be a lot of stuff to go over, and I want to cover it a bit in depth as well as give my thoughts and feelings about everything. I know that Custodes are a lot of people's favorite factions, so I want to give them the credence and the love they deserve. So with all that in mind, you know the drill at this point, boys. Subscribe to help the channel, like the video if you like the video, and let's fucking go! The Custodes are, if I had to be so bold, the pound-for-pound best soldiers in the entirety of the 40k setting. No, I don't care if the Eldar Aspect Warriors of Craft World Turbo Slut secretly have the best peener guardians in the universe. If you run the ones with these guys, you're gonna lose, unless you are literally the pinnacle of your specific faction. There are cases in which Space Marines have gone pretty toe-to-toe with Custodes, maybe once or twice, but never win unless there's some serious warp fuckery afoot. But what exactly is a Custodes? Why are they so powerful, and why is it people keep talking about them in the modern day with the face turning so bright red and puffy that they resemble a Gossamer from Looney Tunes shaved? Yes, I know that reference is like 80 years old. Fuck off. In order of those questions, the answers are the greatest super soldiers, the Emperor made them, and I'm not answering that. But to get into specifics, the Custodes are the handcrafted individual masterpiece soldiers and bodyguards the Emperor made, with an unfortunately high amount of reasoning as to why. Like, for one, he needed bodyguards, and two, he needed confidants who were loyal to only him, which I should also add as a note, being only loyal to him also means they are not loyal to the Imperium. They only respect the word directly from him, not from some policy he enacted as a governing body. So the Imperium does not hold any sway over them. It does not matter who you are in the Imperium, unless you are directly related to the Emperor, they will not respect you in the slightest. And even then, barely. Like Guilliman, they barely listen to Guilliman, to the point where Guilliman has to have a specific high-ranking custodian that he speaks to in order for them to listen to him. They also existed to deal with tasks that could only be completed by the most capable and trusted of the Emperor's creations, like, say, the Solar Watch. Custodians that, even after the Edict of Restraint was removed, which was the edict stating that the Custodians had to stay on Terra to defend the throne, once that was gone, they still adhered to what their title's namesake implied, meaning that they would never leave the Sol system and defended specifically Terra and any threat that could exist towards Terra. Thus, they watched the system of Sol. And then you have things like the Shadow Wardens, the Custodes responsible for the guardianship of the dark cells of Terra. These individuals in particular are known for being an unhappy bunch, but enough talk about that. Let's get even further into the nitty-gritty. A Custodes is usually a little taller than your average Space Marine, Primaris Marine at about 9 feet tall, but the height of a Custodian does not matter nearly as much in comparison to their abilities, which are formatted in a very different way than in comparison to that of a Space Marines. See, Space Marines are boys who are forced to go through surgery from a young age, usually around, usually between the ages of 10 to 14, adding organs and technological components in order to make them the best possible soldiers on a mass-produced scale. Think of a factory dedicated to mass production of high-quality electronic goods and high-quality cars. With Custodes, you have to see their creation more similar to that of an artisanal watchmaker, where each individual gear is handcrafted for the watch in turn, and at the end of it, all of them have the same purpose and accomplish the same goals. As Custodes are needed to be grabbed at an incredibly young age, usually somewhere before the age of 1. They have to be quite literally a baby, and very rarely are they grabbed older than that. I know that there is some instances of, like, at the latest, a 4-year-old being grabbed, but I digress. And their induction into the ranks of the Custodes is not nearly as invasive as the Space Marine gene seed surgeries, as they go through non-invasive gene therapies and a bunch of unique treatments that do not add organs, but instead cause organs to develop in their body naturally as they age. Thus why they are picked up by the age of like 1 or younger, because as the human body develops, it will grow into what is needed to become a custodian. These non-invasive means are actually unique to each Custodes, and I know that that is kind of thrown around a lot, and we have very scant records as to describing why it is described that each Custodes is unique through the process of their own creation. But if I were to extrapolate and maybe add my own 2 cents into the matter, no 2 Custodes are alike. Though their abilities and attributes are basically the same on a top-down level, being the best of the best of the best, it is strictly because all Custodes need to perform on the same level, so custom-fit genetic treatments are used to modify their bodies without the implantation of new organs. It's why you can take a child from any color or creed, and no matter what their base strain of humanity is, they will be able to be modified into a Custodian. They modify their bodies without the implantation of new organs, basically modifying the endocrine and hormonal systems of a developing child to create the necessary structures in their body, taking the genetics of that child and then creating something new dependent on who they are, finding out what the best means of creation would be. This, as it is a non-standard protocol per person, probably costs what would be considered trillions by today's standards, but it's the 41st millennia. They probably have a lot of money to go around. Due to the individual nature of the Custodes creation, you'd think that they'd have a wide variety of strengths depending on the person, and you'd be wrong, as the expressed purpose of a Custodes creation is to make the individual best at everything, hyper-intellectual, hyper-strong, hyper-fast, and impossibly quick to react and process information, as well as interface with the specialized Wargear that you're going to have. Which, by the way, the Wargear that they have is so high quality that it is considered a disgrace if a Space Marine handles it. The pinnacle of the pinnacle. The Custodes without weapons and armor are created so powerful that if we stopped there and just gave them flak armor and a lasgun, they would still be considered the greatest mortal fighters in history. But nah, instead they are equipped with likely the best weapons in the history of the setting, which once again, it is implied that it takes centuries to make these almost indestructible weapons and armor. One of my favorite lore tidbits about 40k is of the storm shields of the Blade Guard veterans. It is actually said that their specific shields take about a decade of crafting to actually make a single one, because it requires a level of circuitry understanding and a small team to work on it almost daily in order for it to be produced. It is implied that even the most mundane of custodian gear, like the Guardian Spear, takes about 4 to 5 times that in terms of time to create. Which, for those who don't know, it literally just looks like a power lance with a bolt gun strapped to it, and from a gameplay perspective, it's basically that but a little bit better. But it's not. It's actually one of the most dangerous weapons that you could see someone wield. But yeah. I can't go too in-depth about the tech, as its creation is a secret, but the various weapons such as the Guardian Spear, the Castellan Axe, the Power Talons, and more specialized power weapons are so dangerous and so costly to make that to own a single one would be like having something worth its weight in gold if gold was worth 1 billion times more than it actually was. And don't even get me started about Custodes armor. The armor of a Custodes is made of oromite instead of ceramite like a Space Marine's armor. Oromite is some magical fantasy bullshit that is somehow more dense and usable than plate steel, but also more resistant to heat than that of tungsten. It's the same shit the Emperor's armor is made of, and it shows, because one of the phrases I tend to use involving Custodes, regardless of what game they're included in, is simply the phrase, "I hope you like having to roll 2 up." And that's because they hit on 2s, they usually wound on 2s, and they have a 2-up armor save pretty much army-wide no matter what piece you're running, unless you're running Sisters of Silence. I don't think anything has anything less than a 2-up outside of that. The Custodes are so powerful in lore that a force of 1,000 Custodes is probably enough to turn the tide of any battle outside of fighting in the center of the warp. Which I remind those who aren't too on the up and up on the Horus Heresy lore, they actually really fucking did. And they put up a goddamn decent fight that lasted for way longer than it probably should have. In terms of hierarchical structures after that, the ranks and traditions are mostly a mystery, but we do know that the two main figureheads we know of right now are the Captain General, who is Trajan Valorous, who is one of the most dangerous men in the universe. Then you have the Custodian representative I mentioned earlier, who stands alongside Gilliman during wars in order to give him advice on how to best handle Custodes, as well as delegating his orders to the Custodian guard around him. This man is known as Maldavar Kalkwan. He is a cantankerous old dickhead. In terms of Custodes, there isn't much else to know. They only technically have one weakness, and that is that they have no psychics amongst their ranks. But even then, that weakness, and I say weakness with pithy air quotes, is covered in the next topic I want to discuss, which is the Sisters of Silence. Okay, so the Sisters of Silence are probably one of the most overlooked but badass sub-factions in the entire setting, and I will not hear otherwise. They are often overlooked as simply the Custodes' anti-psyker tool, which is such an understatement as to be insulting once you learn more about them, as they are trained so much that in terms of combat prowess, they could actually have a fighting chance in one-on-one combat with Space Marines of all things. They have training so intense and so brutal that they are in lockstep with Custodes for most of their adventures. They don't fight nearly as close to the other Custodes as you'd think. They are still humans after all, albeit heavily augmented humans, but I do think they are above Sisters of Battle, but below Space Marines in terms of skill. But the main thing that separates them from the majority of the different armies in the Imperium is, simply put, the pariah gene. So now that we kind of gassed them up a little bit, let's get into the specifics. So a Sister of Silence is a female blank, and blanks are humans that are born with a genetic sequence known as the pariah gene, which, now that I actually think about it, I don't think I've ever heard any mention of a pariah gene manifesting in other species. Now, I might just not be as learned as I could have been, and I could also just look it up to see if there was, but regardless, the pariah gene has a bunch of different effects. But due to some conflicting sources, we don't have a really concrete answer as to what it actually does. But in simplest terms, the pariah gene causes a person who has it to interact with the warp in the same way you putting regular gas into a diesel car would. That is to say that they do not interface with the normal spiritual world the whole universe does, and in fact destroys/disrupts it. Now, there is a theory that blanks don't have souls, but in The Voice, a pretty decent short story about Sisters of Silence, it is discovered that it is possible for Sisters of Silence to make deals with warp entities for whatever soul they have. There is also a theory that blanks are actually an inverted psyker, where instead of exerting their force of will onto the universe is exerting within you, giving you a null space. Think of it like a gravity well, which is a scientific concept, which I'm not going to pretend to say that I know how it works, but basically a gravity well needs to exist in order for gravity to function correctly in the universe. I think the real answer is somewhere in between, where in 40k the religious often intersects with the scientific, so it would make the most sense to be somewhere in the middle of those two answers. Regardless, as 40k's setting goes, if you are sentient and sapient and particularly emotional, you have, I guess for lack of a better term, a spark, a flame. This spark shines inside the warp in a way that is kind of noticeable. Think of it as like a mirrored universe where the light of a person's soul is reflected in place of their physical body. The average human is simply a match in the dark. The more psychic a race is, the more that they are represented in that world. So a human would be a match, an Eldar that is non-psychically inclined is a torch that is burning brightly in the warp. Blanks, on the other hand, do not appear in the warp, and in fact, they are seen as an abscess, a shadow that eats away at the light around it like an inverted flame burning away paper made of light. Now you might ask, what would it be like to be this sort of person, and why would it be useful? And the answer answer is, it's incredibly shitty. Existing around blanks kind of sucks, even if they are untrained. Blanks constantly exert an aura of fuck you, which makes you feel like the light is being sucked out of the world. They are literally just walking depression. Like, you ever get the ick from someone and not know why? They just seem normal, but like, you're just around them and you just feel uncomfortable? Yeah, it's like that, but times 10 and always. They just make people feel yucky, like they're draining the vibes out of the room, and this often leads to blanks either being murdered in the crib by parents who think their child is a weird psychic mutant, or some kind of demon. But if they survive long enough, trust me, it actually gets worse. As the pariah gene develops, these children often get outcast from whatever village or community they're in, and can only really band together with others of their kind, but pariahs are incredibly rare. So the statistic that I usually hear bandied about is for every billion people there is one psyker, and for every billion psychers there is one blank. So it's very rare that multiple blanks can be found in a single spot, but it does happen from time to time, especially in these mega colonies. But if they are neither killed nor outcast nor grow up too quickly nor are a guy, they can get picked up and inducted into the Silent Sisterhood, with the purpose of hunting psychers as well as fighting demons now. Now, why specifically psychers? As I mentioned, it sucks to be around them, but if you're a psycher, it fucking double sucks. On top of it sucking, if they are a trained blank, like a Sister of Silence on the upper echelons of the ranks, you could die if you are a psycher and you're getting a bit too close to them. As the flame, the spark I mentioned, a psycher is like a bonfire, and that is basically your life essence. If you are near a sister, they snuff that out, and that can cause a lot of trauma to people who are usually pretty frail to start with. They literally sever your connection to the warp just with their presence, which is why they are incredibly useful to the forces of the Custodes, which do not have psychers for a myriad of reasons, which again we'll cover in the next section after we cover Sisters. But the Sisters of Silence have a hierarchy, and to ascend it requires training and discipline, the likes of which that you would likely never see in any other regiment for the entirety of the Imperium, because this stuff would actually break a common person. But goddamn, do they do it? A big one is for the first two major ranks, you're actually still allowed to speak. There's the Acolytes and the Novice Sisters of Silence. They can actually speak using their own voices. It's kind of, discouraged, but they still do it from time to time. The main reason why is because they need to learn the major ways of communication that these Sisters of Silence use in the day-to-day life in the higher ranks. Yeah, these bitches have numerous different ways of communicating through different hand gestures of different names. The main ones is that there is Thought Mark and there is Battle Mark, which are the main ones that we kind of know about. There are a few others, like there's one that's basically just a transcribed version of Thought Mark that is used to basically convey messages over long distances through a digital medium, because if you're speaking to someone over a walkie-talkie, well, they can't speak, so they need to have a way to convey their ideas. But regardless, Battle Mark is taught first, usually to the Acolyte upon first induction into the ranks of the Sisterhood. And it's because it's very easy to learn. It is wide motions that do not have much grace to them and can be easily interpreted and seen on the battlefield, and thus the name Battle Mark. Single word phrases used to convey short meaning in battle. It is a very important thing to learn because you can't just go into a very complex soliloquy with your hand gestures during, a gunfight. So, yeah, the big thing here is that Battle Mark is often regarded as context-based. As I mentioned, it's single words per hand gesture that are only used for the battlefield. So, say a sister is right in front of you and there is a door in front of you. The sister could look at you and do the sign for door with an additional sign for fire. It could mean that she wants you to burn the door down, or it could mean that there is a fire behind the door. It all depends on the situation and if there's smoke already coming out from behind the door. Then you have thought form, which takes longer to learn and thus is stressed for those who are going to take the vow of tranquility, which is the vow to never speak again that you need to take in order to graduate from being a novice sister to a null maiden, which is basically the bottom rank. Thought form is a flowery, flowing form of traditional sign language that can convey more complex thoughts and ideas, basically their way of conversing just normally with their normal sisters, as well as communicating with Custodes and other workers of the Imperium. It's a very important thing to have. But yeah, once those have been mastered and the sister is well versed enough in combat, they become a Sister of Silence, true and blue, with the rank of Null Maiden, like I said, equipped with special power armor, made to maximize agility, as well as increase the output of their blank abilities. They are given numerous different arrays of weapons, from special flamethrowers that burn psychers, Witch Seeker bolts for bolt guns, as well as special swords for Oblivion Knights that are able to rip through psychers and cause a special high damage. The main thing that all sisters are equipped with are specialized grenades and specialized tools. The main grenade that you're going to see on all of them is the Psych Out grenade, which just obliterates psychers, turns them to a pile of regretful ash on the ground. So there are further ranks that you could have probably heard me talking about throughout this section, like Oblivion Knights and Knights Abyssal, Centuras, and so on and so forth. But you can kind of figure out that they're just Sister of Silence, but better with a higher rank. They command more people, they command more individuals, and so on. They usually are dispersed throughout the universe as well, though a lot of them are on Terra at any given point. They often have a wide range of weapons dedicated to killing psychers and demons, as since demons are things of the warp, they tend to not do well with anti-warp shenanigans, and thus their purposes can be a little bit more hyper-specialized depending on what they're sent with. See, Space Marines need help dealing with demons, you could easily send in a squad of Sisters of Silence and make the entire combat a little bit easier to deal with. Or you could send in, Grey Knights, which I guess also works, not nearly as cool. But regardless, alongside that main purpose of killing things, they're also very, very handily used on black ships, which are these massive ships that go around the universe to capture rogue psychers and begin to train them for an express purpose. Now, that express purpose could likely also mean that they're sacrificed to the Golden Throne to keep the Emperor alive and the Astronomicon lit for a little longer, but it also means that they can recruit psychers into the Militarum or any other aid that is needed throughout the Imperium. That's kind of all we know, but before I go, I do want to point out a fun fact about the Sisters of Silence that not a lot of people discuss, and it's that Sisters of Silence kind of operate similar to Psychers, where each individual iterance of the pariah gene is actually different depending on the sister. So their blankness, like their powers, manifests differently depending on the person. Some people could just get like the shittiest version of it, where it's like their blankness only manifests if they're directly touching someone, but sometimes it could be they shut off psychic abilities in a straight line directly in front of them as long as they can see something directly. Think like Aizawa from My Hero Academia. Yes, I made an anime reference in a 40k video, leave me alone. But then you have other individuals who just have something simple, like they shut off psychic abilities within like a 5-foot dome extended around them. Then you have people who can localize a small dome of their own at range whenever they see fit. There's really no standardization for it, and if you get stuck with kind of a shitty one, you're likely just going to be a rank and file Sister of Silence for as long as you live. But it's still a very useful ability to have, turning off psychic powers. Though that does bring up the age-old question of, it doesn't mean that psychers aren't still threats to you. Say your powers can only affect someone who's within 20 feet of you, and someone's outside of 30 feet. Sure, if they huck a fireball made out of psychic fire at you, it'll fizzle away, but if they can lift up boulders and throw one directly at you, it's not like turning off the psychic aura that is controlling the boulder's trajectory is going to save you. You just gotta get out of the way. And that's kind of the big flaw with Sisters of Silence. They still have that little issue where they can manipulate the Immaterium to turn it off, but they can't really, stop it once it's kind of phased into the real world's type of shit, right? So collateral damage is usually the best way to deal with them, but you're also likely dealing with Custodes if you're seeing them, and you have other problems. Oh, and if you're a guy who is a blank, I diagnosed you with good luck. Good luck with that, because you're likely either going to just be ignored, neglected, killed in a Sciaphus Cain book, or you're going to be sent to the Assassinorum to be turned into a Calexis, which is also incredibly shitty in a different way, because you're just going to be lonely forever and likely under sedatives. So yeah, on to the last section, which is just the bits and bobs, the extra little things that I want to talk about. For the last segment of this video, I'm going to be discussing a bunch of odds and ends, some small pieces of trivia for all of the Talons of the Emperor combined that I felt like I couldn't really add to prior segments without kind of mucking up the pacing a little bit. Firstly, let's get into one of my favorites, and that is the blood games. The blood games are such a fun idea. I know they're talked about to death at this point, but I still want to go over. If I recall correctly, the blood games were technically started by Alfarius, or rather inspired by him, making a faux attempt at killing the Emperor one day to prove that it is actually a lot easier than the Custodians and the Emperor thought. So now the Custodians make a game out of trying to find weaknesses in the Imperium's defenses, especially in regards to protecting the Emperor. This stretches back to the early days of the Great Crusade, so how does one engage in the blood games? Well, you elect to do so as a Custodian, sometimes in a group, sometimes just one person deciding they had a point to prove, and from then on you are allowed a small grace period to set up. From there, you must find a way to break into the Imperial Palace and try to kill the Emperor. Simple as, right? Well, they have been doing so for many thousands of years, and because of that, most weaknesses have been eliminated. So, how serious are the games? Deadly fucking serious. Basically, you have to try and kill the Emperor, and kill anyone who gets in your way. It doesn't matter who is in your way, I should note, even if they are another Custodes. Because if someone as strong as a Custodes can break into the palace and after killing maybe 2 or 3 guys gets to the Emperor, then maybe there are a few oversights that need to be looked into. A lot of these games are like galaxy spanning, as they take like months to maybe even years to complete, and it is seen as a great honor to get really close to accomplishing it, as well as working out flaws that could possibly exist in the framework of the Imperial Palace. There was this like one time. The game has a variety of winners over the years, ranging from one individual who was this one guy, Custodes of course, who was able to find a specific narcotic substance that specialized in slowing your heart. It was a system depressant, and it specialized in slowing down your heart rate a lot depending on the dose that you took. But it was not checked by most Imperial scanners. He pretended to be a vat-grown ab-human working in a quarry where it was developed, working around with a bunch of ogrins and other vat-grown individuals. This Custodes found this substance and realized its effects, secretly stealing the drug from other members of the quarry and making it a lot more potent using basic chemistry. Using this, he was able to slow his heart rate to like some shit like 1 beat every 2 minutes and sneak in past the biometric scanners of the Imperial Palace on a cart of metals he snuck in on. Bro was able to use his knowledge to arm himself, kill some castle guards, and get within 5 feet of the still living Emperor, who is currently in meditation. His Custodian brothers were genuinely impressed, as he was the closest in quite a long ass time, though it took him like 9 months to get this whole plan in order, so there is that. Also, shout out to that one lady Custodes who tried to teleport a nuclear warhead directly into the throne room, which, okay, it's not exactly subtle, but I guess it works, right? Another fun fact about the Custodes is, hey, did you know that the Custodes have different variants of Terminator armor? Yeah, like Space Marine Terminator armor. They have that big, bulky armor that is meant for heavy assaults and shit. You know that? Yeah, which, yeah, it doesn't really make a lot of sense if you think about it initially, because, I mean, Custodes wear armor made out of oromite, which is actually considered near indestructible and also way more lightweight than Terminator armor, so having something that is a slower moving variant kind of makes no sense and it seems a little dumb, but actually when you dig into it, they have a very different purpose. See, there are a few major variants of Terminator armor. I'm going to be mostly discussing Aquilon pattern Terminator armor, but there's also Aluris and so on and so forth. But the Aquilon pattern Terminator armor is based off of the frame of the Cataphracti Terminator suit that Space Marines were using at the time. But due to its superior mobility, it's considered a significant upgrade. It's basically only marginally an upgrade on the durability of traditional Custodes oromite power armor in terms of just the metal being stronger. But the thing that it does give that pushes it over the edge is the fact that it has increased energy capacitors and power output. Basically meaning the refractor fields that surround them work even harder than normal, meaning that it's got an extra powerful force field. More interesting is that the Aquilon Terminators, because they have access to a lot more power, they can use weapons that would drain the suits of most normal Terminators or even Space Marines. Specifically the Solarite power weapons that they're allowed to choose from, that only Custodes really can use. They were old Thunder Warriors weapons, but Solarite power fists, Solarite power talons, and so on require a lot of power to actually run, as they're more powerful than your standard Space Marine power weapon of the same kind of idea, like power fists and lightning claws. These weapons, even by comparison of most other Custodes weapons, are a bit brutal, with the Solarite Power Fist being able to punch holes through tanks. And even considering that, the defenses are also magnified by the additional power, making them into one-man walking armies. More so than usual. One last fact I want to share is kind of a minor Sisters of Silence one. Basically, Sisters of Silence hold the idea of being completely non-verbal their entire life as a blessing, point where some sisters, through injury or choice, elect to have their mouths permanently sealed away or replaced with metal augments that completely remove their ability to speak. It's a great honor for them to do so. So with all that in mind, you'd think that that's where they got their name, right? You know, Sisters of Silence. And, well, you'd be partially correct, because the name Sisters of Silence to the layman comes from the fact that they don't speak. But it's actually a bit more metaphysical than just that. See, Sisters of Silence train from their induction to not think in sounds but in actions, not communicate even to themselves through thoughts, but more through motions. This is because in training, all inductees are taught about the silence within, which is this weird emptiness, a void inside their minds and bodies, that each Sister of Silence, if they focus on it, it can actually increase their powers as a blank. But to do so, they need to actually remove all concept of sound to the point where they have no ability to push any sound out of any kind. If they need to focus, they need to remove all forms of sound. Thus the name Sisters of Silence, as they are bound by the silence within. Though there is actually records in history of sisters speaking well after their vows have been taken. Shout out to that one bitch who, just to fuck with a different sister from a rival order of sisters, spoke to her alone in her healing pod just to say something akin to, "Lol, no one is ever going to believe you that I said this," in reference to her speaking, which is really goddamn funny. And that was kind of everything. I know there is like an infinite amount of support staff for the Talons of the Emperor, as well as biologists and so on and so forth, but the parts that you all kind of care about are basically more or less summed up all there. I tried to go into as much detail as possible here because I want to start doing more and more long-form videos that stretch from 30 minutes to even more. It's also easier for me to make longer-form videos than it is to make shorter videos, because if you couldn't tell, I'm a long-winded bitch and have a lot to say about most things, but condensing my thoughts has always been a problem for the last couple videos, so I said, fuck it, throw caution to the wind. Also, as you are watching this video, I'm out of the office at the moment. I'm getting this video made up a week in advance just so I can rest assured that you guys have content while I'm gone, and I'm visiting a friend in another country. And I hope this all works out properly and there ain't no dings on the copyright or adult content systems, because if I have to take this down and do last-minute edits before I'm about to head off onto a plane, that's gonna suck. But regardless, when I get back from my trip, I might have a small delay in videos for 1 week, but that's because I'm going to jump straight into finishing the 100k sub special. It's pretty much outlined right now, and like in theory it should be done pretty quickly once I get going, but I think that all of you are going to like it, as it's going to be a pretty long affair and it's going to be peak YouTube slop. So let me know what your favorite fact about the Custodes is in the comments, and if there is anything you'd like me to do a deep dive on in the future. Also subscribe, as it helps the channel, and hitting 200k in 2025 would be pretty swell. Special thanks to my channel members for supporting me, as with your help I can do this content to support myself, as well as my various editors. If you join me as a member, you gain access to videos the second they are uploaded, as well as if you become the highest tier, which is the Arthur Lord, you gain access to 2 additional videos a month. So, if you want to support this channel, that is the best way to do it. Thanks once again for watching. And before I go, can't believe I forgot to mention that Custodes have the coolest dreadnoughts in the entire history of the setting. Or maybe I'm cooking something else up. Only time will tell. Bye-bye for now.